The rifle crack split the morning air like thunder in a tomb. Staff Sergeant Robert Passanisi pressed himself deeper into the elephant grass and counted the muzzle flashes. 12 Japanese soldiers were about to die. They just didn't know it yet. March 7, 1944. The Shaduzup Valley in northern Burma lay shrouded in pre-dawn mist so thick it felt like breathing through wet wool. Passanisi had been in position since midnight. His clothes were soaked through with dew and sweat. Leeches had found their way into his boots hours ago. He ignored them. The Japanese patrol was walking straight into his kill zone. The enemy soldiers chatted casually as they moved along the trail. Their equipment clinked with each step. One laughed at something his sergeant said. They had done this route 50 times before. The jungle belonged to them. The Americans were hundreds of miles away, probably sick with dysentery or malaria like all white soldiers who tried to fight here. That's what their commanders had told them. Passanisi raised his hand. 47 Marauders hidden in the undergrowth saw the signal. Safeties clicked off in the darkness. The Japanese point man was 20 yards away now. 15. 10. The hand dropped. The jungle exploded. Automatic rifle fire erupted from 3 sides simultaneously. The first 3 Japanese soldiers collapsed before their bodies could register what was happening. The 4th managed to scream before a burst from a Thompson submachine gun cut him down. Lieutenant Yamada dove behind a fallen log as bullets shredded the bark above his head. His mind couldn't process what was happening. This was impossible. Intelligence said the Americans were at least 2 days' march away. They couldn't move through the jungle this fast. They couldn't set ambushes like this. This was Japanese tactical doctrine being used against Japanese soldiers. He tried to rally his men, but his voice was drowned out by gunfire. Private Tanaka beside him was firing blindly into the green wall surrounding them. Then Tanaka's head snapped back and he crumpled. Yamada grabbed the radio from his dead operator and screamed for reinforcements. Static answered him. The Americans had already cut the communication lines. Through the chaos, Yamada saw them. American soldiers moving through the bamboo like ghosts. They didn't charge or yell. They advanced in pairs, one covering while the other moved. When they killed, they did it quietly and efficiently. No wasted ammunition. No heroics. Just systematic elimination. The fight lasted for minutes. When the shooting stopped, 12 Japanese soldiers lay dead on the jungle floor. The Marauders were already stripping the bodies of intelligence materials and ammunition. No celebration. No war cries. They melted back into the jungle as quickly as they had appeared, leaving only death and silence behind. 2 weeks earlier, Colonel Tanaka had stood before a room full of Japanese officers at regional headquarters in Myakina. He held up an American newspaper that somehow had made its way to Burma. The headline read something about Roosevelt's Special Jungle Unit. Tanaka laughed and the room laughed with him. "These Americans think they can fight in our jungle," he said. "Look at them." He showed reconnaissance photos of American soldiers with mules struggling up a hillside. They need animals to carry their soft food and unnecessary equipment. Our soldiers live off the jungle. They bring hot rations and chocolate bars. We eat rice and dried fish. They will melt in Burma like snow in summer. The intelligence reports backed him up. The Americans were products of a soft culture. They needed comfort. They complained about conditions. When the rains came, they would break. When the diseases hit, they would beg for evacuation. The jungle would defeat them long before Japanese bullets did. "We destroyed the British in Malaya," Tanaka reminded them. "We crushed the Dutch in Indonesia. These territories belonged to European powers for centuries, and we took them in weeks. Why? Because we understand jungle warfare. We are born to it. These Americans are playing soldier in a world they cannot understand." Now Lieutenant Yamada lay dying in the mud of that same jungle. Blood leaked from 3 holes in his chest. As his vision darkened, one thought repeated in his mind. We were wrong. We were wrong about everything. The Americans who had just destroyed his patrol were already 2 miles away and setting up their next ambush. They moved through the jungle with a comfort that had taken months of suffering to achieve. Their uniforms were patched and rotting, their boots held together with communications wire. Most had lost 30 pounds since entering Burma. But they moved with purpose and deadliness that the Japanese had never encountered from Western forces. These weren't the soft Americans from intelligence reports. These were Merrill's Marauders, and they were just getting started. The jungle wanted them dead. Every step through the Burmese wilderness brought new ways to die. Private First Class Sam Wilson felt his boots sink into what looked like solid ground. Suddenly he was waist-deep in mud that gripped like concrete. The more he struggled, the deeper he sank. 2 soldiers grabbed his arms and pulled. The suction fought back. It took 4 men and a mule rope to extract him. When Wilson finally emerged, his boots stayed behind, claimed by the earth. He would march the next 10 miles barefoot through terrain that shredded skin like cheese graters. This was day 12 of the march. They had covered 40 miles. Only 710 to go. The heat pressed down on them like a physical weight. The temperature reached 100 degrees by noon, but under the triple canopy of leaves, the air didn't move. It sat thick and wet, making each breath feel like drowning in slow motion. Then at night in the mountains, the temperature plummeted. Men who had sweated through their uniforms hours earlier now shivered uncontrollably in the darkness. The mules were dying. These animals carried everything the Marauders needed to fight: ammunition, mortars, medical supplies, and food. But the narrow mountain trails weren't made for pack animals. Private Rodriguez watched in horror as a mule missed its footing on a cliff path. The animal's scream echoed through the valley as it tumbled 200 feet down, taking a week's worth of medical supplies with it. By the end of the second week, they were losing 5 mules a day. Each loss meant men had to carry more weight. 60-pound packs became 70 pounds, then 80. Soldiers already weakened by disease now stumbled under loads that would challenge fresh troops. The leeches were everywhere. They dropped from leaves and emerged from the water. During rest breaks, men would burn them off with cigarette tips. The smell of scorched leech became as familiar as sweat. Some soldiers stopped bothering to remove them. What was the point? New ones would attach within minutes. But leeches were nothing compared to the diseases. Corporal James Mitchell was one of the first to fall to cerebral malaria. One moment he was marching in formation. The next, he was convulsing on the ground, his temperature spiking to 105 degrees. The medics could do nothing but give him morphine and watch him die. He was 22 years old. By week 3, 80% of the unit had dysentery. The brutal mathematics of the march meant no stopping for bodily functions. Men soiled themselves while walking and kept going. Pride disappeared when survival was at stake. The smell of human waste mixed with jungle rot and death became their constant companion. Yet somehow, in this hell, brotherhood grew stronger. Private Roy Matsumoto, a Japanese-American soldier whose parents were in an internment camp back home, taught the unit how to move silently through bamboo groves. Southern farm boys who had never spoken to an Asian person before the war now trusted him with their lives. When Private Tony Costello from Boston collapsed with fever, 3 soldiers from Alabama took turns carrying him. They had mocked his accent weeks earlier. Now they refused to leave him behind. He weighs nothing anyway, they joked. The Boston boy had lost 40 pounds and looked like a skeleton wrapped in uniform. The medics performed miracles with almost nothing. Captain Abraham Kolodny operated on wounded soldiers by firelight, removing shrapnel with instruments sterilized in boiling water from streams. When the morphine ran low, men bit on rifle slings while he dug metal from their flesh. When the sulfa powder ran out, he packed wounds with boiled cloth and prayer. At night, they formed defensive perimeters. Every man knew his position and field of fire. They slept in 2-hour shifts, one eye open, rifles pointed outward. The jungle sounds drove some men mad. Was that cracking branch a Japanese patrol or a deer? Was that whistle a signal or a night bird? Trigger fingers stayed tense through the darkness. General Frank Merrill himself marched with his men despite a heart condition he hid from everyone. During one particularly brutal climb, he collapsed. His aide tried to call for a medical evacuation. Merrill grabbed the radio and threw it into the jungle. "If my men can make it, so can I," he said. He was back on his feet in an hour, setting a pace that men half his age struggled to match. The first major test came at Wallabam in early March. The Marauders had infiltrated behind Japanese lines and caught the veteran 18th Division completely by surprise. The enemy had controlled this area for 2 years. They thought they knew every trail and stream. They were wrong. The Marauders struck from 3 directions simultaneously. Japanese Captain Kato would later write in his diary that the Americans appeared like jungle spirits. One moment there was silence. The next, machine gun fire erupted from positions that shouldn't exist. The mortars started falling at dawn. Colonel Charles Hunter counted the explosions from his foxhole on Mpam-Ga Hill. 20 rounds in the first minute. The Japanese had brought their heavy guns. This wasn't a probe. This was the beginning of something bigger. March 28, 1944. 2nd Battalion had 700 men holding a hilltop barely 500 yards across. The Japanese 3rd Division had surrounded them with over 3,000 troops. The math was simple. The reality was about to become brutal. Water was already a problem. The only spring sat at the base of the hill, exposed to Japanese fire. Every canteen filled meant risking death. Private Eugene Piasecki volunteered for the first water run. He crawled down the slope in darkness, filled 6 canteens, and started back. A Japanese machine gun opened up when he was 20 feet from safety. The bullets missed him by inches, but the canteens were torn from his hands. 6 hours of risk for nothing. The first major assault came at noon. Hunter watched through his binoculars as Japanese soldiers formed up in the valley below. They were taking their time, confident in their numbers. Officers walked among the ranks, swords glinting in the sunlight. Then came the sound that made American spines turn cold. Banzai, the death cry. 3,000 voices screaming as one. They came up the hill in waves. The Marauders held their fire until the Japanese were within 50 yards. Then the American weapons spoke. M1 Garands cracked in disciplined rhythm. Browning automatic rifles swept the slopes. Machine gunner Sergeant Tony Grissom fired 400 rounds without stopping, the barrel of his gun glowing red-hot. The Japanese bodies piled up on the slopes. Those behind used the corpses as shields, pushing forward over their dead comrades. Some made it to the American foxholes. The fighting became personal. Rifle butts and bayonets, knives and entrenching tools. Private David Quaid killed 3 Japanese soldiers with a shovel when his rifle jammed. After 2 hours, the Japanese pulled back. They left 300 dead on the hillside. The Marauders had lost 8 men, but everyone knew this was just the beginning. The siege routine developed quickly. Japanese attacks at dawn and dusk. Mortar barrages throughout the day. Snipers making any movement deadly. The wounded couldn't be evacuated. They lay in shallow depressions, trying not to scream when the morphine ran out. The dead couldn't be buried properly. They were stacked behind rocks, covered with ponchos. By day 4, ammunition was running low. Hunter issued new orders. No automatic fire unless the Japanese were inside 20 yards. Make every bullet count. The Japanese sensed the weakness and pressed harder. Food disappeared by day 6. Men chewed on bamboo shoots and leather straps. Someone shot a monkey that wandered into the perimeter. 40 men shared the meat raw because fires would draw mortars. It was the best meal they'd had in days. The wounded kept fighting. Corporal Jim Thompson had shrapnel in his left shoulder and couldn't lift his arm. He showed another soldier how to load his rifle while he aimed and fired with one hand. He killed 12 Japanese soldiers this way before infection finally forced him to stop. April 9, 1944. Easter Sunday. The Japanese launched their biggest attack yet. An entire regiment came up the hill. The preliminary bombardment lasted 2 hours. Trees exploded into splinters. Foxholes collapsed. When the barrage lifted, the Marauders could barely see through the smoke and dust. The Japanese came through the haze like demons, wave after wave, climbing over their own dead. Private Piasecki was alone at his machine gun position after his loader was killed. He fired until the barrel melted, then grabbed a rifle and kept shooting. When that ran out of ammunition, he threw grenades. When the grenades were gone, he picked up a Japanese sword from a dead officer. The eastern perimeter cracked. Japanese soldiers poured through a gap where 3 Marauders had been killed. For a moment, it looked like the position would be overrun. Then the cooks and medics grabbed weapons. Men with fever and wounds crawled from aid stations to join the fight. They threw the Japanese back in hand-to-hand combat that lasted 30 minutes. Sergeant Roy Matsumoto performed an act of insane bravery. He crawled behind Japanese lines in the middle of the battle. Speaking perfect Japanese, he shouted false orders that caused 2 enemy companies to fire on each other. In the confusion, the Marauders counterattacked and restored their lines. The relief force was fighting to reach them. 1st and 3rd battalions were moving through the jungle faster than anyone thought possible. They marched 18 hours a day, fighting through Japanese blocking positions. Men collapsed from exhaustion and were left with guards to catch up later. Nothing mattered except reaching their surrounded brothers. On April 9th, late afternoon, the trapped Marauders heard American artillery falling on Japanese positions outside their perimeter. The relief force had arrived. The siege was broken. The Japanese pulled back that night, leaving 1,500 dead around the hilltop. The men standing at the base of the Cuman Range didn't look like soldiers anymore. They looked like walking corpses. 1,300 Marauders remained from the original 3,000. Most weighed less than 100 pounds. Their uniforms hung on skeletal frames like rags on scarecrows. But General Stilwell needed them to take Myitkyina airfield, and they were going to try. April 28, 1944. The monsoon had started early. Rain fell in sheets so thick that men couldn't see 10 feet ahead. The trail up the mountain turned into a river of mud. Each step required pulling your foot from sucking earth that tried to steal your boots. The lucky ones still had boots. Others wrapped their feet in strips torn from dead men's uniforms. The mules were gone. Most had died or been eaten. Now the men carried everything: mortars, machine guns, ammunition, and what little medicine remained. Private Leonardo Gonzalez carried a 60mm mortar baseplate on his back. It weighed 45 pounds. He weighed 110. When asked how he kept going, he said he forgot how to stop. They climbed 6,000 feet through jungle so thick they had to hack through with machetes. The catching guides led them on paths that weren't on any map. These local tribesmen hated the Japanese and had agreed to help. Without them, the Marauders would have wandered in circles until death claimed them. At night, they couldn't light fires. Japanese patrols were everywhere. The men huddled together for warmth, shivering in wet clothes that never dried. They ate cold K rations in darkness, when they had rations at all. Most nights, dinner was rainwater and whatever roots they could find. Disease was killing more men than bullets. Corporal Mike Patterson had cerebral malaria and typhus simultaneously. His temperature spiked so high that his friends used him to warm their hands. He marched in delirium, held upright by soldiers on either side. When they finally stopped, he asked where they were. Someone told him they were attacking Myitkyina tomorrow. "Good," he said. "Then I can finally lay down." The Japanese had no idea they were coming. The garrison at Myitkyina felt secure. The Cuman Range was impassable during monsoon season. No military force could cross those mountains in these conditions. The airfield defenders followed their routine. Morning drills, afternoon maintenance, evening rice and sake. They were rear area troops. Mechanics and clerks. The real fighters were at the front lines, far from here. May 16th, the Marauders reached the assembly area outside Myitkyina. They had marched 65 miles through impossible terrain in 19 days. Scouts reported the airfield was lightly defended. Maybe 200 Japanese, mostly support personnel. The attack was set for tomorrow morning. Lieutenant Colonel George McGee gathered his officers. "We get one chance at this," he said. "Complete surprise is our only advantage. If they have time to organize a defense, we're finished. We hit hard, fast, and don't stop until the airfield is ours." May 17, 1944. 10:30 in the morning. The Japanese sergeant working on a damaged Zero fighter heard gunfire. He assumed it was training. Then he saw American soldiers charging across the open ground. His mind refused to process what his eyes were seeing. Americans. Here. Impossible. The Marauders covered 800 yards of open ground in minutes. Japanese defenders fired wildly, confused and terrified. Most had never seen combat. They had been told the Americans were hundreds of miles away, dying in the jungle. Now these skeletal figures were among them, killing with mechanical efficiency. Sergeant Harold Fuller charged a machine gun position with his Browning automatic rifle blazing from the hip. He killed the three-man crew and turned their gun on fleeing Japanese troops. Private First Class Robert Howard threw grenades into the control tower, then cleared it room by room with his Thompson submachine gun. The Japanese commander, Colonel Maruyama, tried to organize a defense. A Marauder sniper killed him 20 minutes into the battle. Without leadership, the Japanese resistance collapsed. Support troops fled toward the town. Pilots ran from their quarters in underwear, leaving weapons behind. By noon, it was over. The airfield belonged to the Marauders. 150 Japanese lay dead. 15 Americans had been killed. The impossible had been achieved. Northern Burma's most strategic airfield had fallen in less than 2 hours. The radio operator sent the coded message to India. "Merchant of Venice has arrived at Mother's house." Within 3 hours, the first C-47 transport landed with ammunition and medical supplies. Wounded Marauders were loaded aboard for evacuation. Some cried as they left their brothers behind. But the fight wasn't over. The Japanese rushed 4,000 reinforcements to Myitkyina. The Marauders, reduced to fewer than 600 combat-effective men, now had to hold what they had taken. The exhausted soldiers dug foxholes in the airfield perimeter. They knew the counterattacks would come soon. Colonel Kuroda sat in his headquarters reading the final reports from Burma. His hands trembled slightly as he turned each page. The evidence was undeniable. The Americans they had mocked as soft and weak had destroyed Japan's finest jungle fighters. They had done it while outnumbered, diseased, and starving. They had done the impossible. "We called them white monkeys playing soldier," Kuroda wrote in his personal journal. "We laughed at their mules and heavy packs. We said the jungle would eat them alive. Instead, they became the jungle. They became something worse than death itself. My men started calling them the demons who refused to die." The statistics were staggering. 3,000 Marauders had entered Burma. By August 1944, only 130 could still hold a rifle. That was a 93% casualty rate. No other American unit in any theater of war had suffered such losses and continued fighting. Yet they had killed over 10,000 Japanese soldiers. A 10-to-1 ratio against veteran troops who knew the terrain. The captured Japanese documents revealed the psychological impact. Soldier after soldier wrote about the terror of facing Marauders. They appeared from nowhere. They attacked from impossible directions. They kept fighting when they should have been dead. One Japanese private wrote to his mother that he would rather face a tiger than another American ambush. General Tanaka, who had laughed at the newspaper stories about Roosevelt's jungle fighters, submitted his final assessment to Tokyo. "These were not the Americans we expected," he wrote. "They adapted to jungle warfare faster than our own troops. They learned to live with disease and starvation. They turned our own tactics against us. We taught them through our arrogance, and they became our superiors." The Marauders themselves were scattered across hospitals from India to the United States. Most would never fully recover. The diseases they carried would kill them young. Malaria would return throughout their lives. Intestinal parasites would plague them for decades. The jungle had marked them permanently. Private Sam Wilson died at 45. His liver, destroyed by repeated malaria attacks, finally gave out. Sergeant Tony Grissom made it to 50 before heart problems from untreated jungle fever killed him. One by one, the demons who refused to die in Burma died at home, their bodies finally collecting payment for what they had endured. General Frank Merrill underwent multiple heart surgeries. The attacks he had hidden during the campaign had damaged his heart beyond repair. He died in 1955, only 11 years after leading his men through hell. At his funeral, surviving Marauders stood at attention despite their own failing health. They buried him with full military honors and memories of Green Hell. Roy Matsumoto lived longer than most. The Japanese-American soldier who had crawled behind enemy lines and saved 2nd Battalion at Mpumga survived to age 100. He spent his final decades teaching young people about the Nisei soldiers who fought for America while their families sat in internment camps. He never spoke bitterly about the irony. The recognition came slowly. The Presidential Unit Citation arrived first. Then individual medals. Bronze stars for every surviving Marauder. Distinguished Service Crosses for extraordinary bravery. But the highest honors took decades. The Pentagon classified much of their story. The Burma campaign was forgotten as America celebrated victories in Europe and the Pacific. Families fought for proper recognition. Sons and daughters of dead Marauders wrote letters to Congress for 50 years. They demanded their fathers receive the honor they deserved. Finally, in 2020, 76 years after the Jungle Campaign, Congress awarded the Marauders the Congressional Gold Medal. Only 4 survivors lived to see it. Hollywood tried to tell their story in 1962. The film Merrill's Marauders starred Jeff Chandler and was shot in the Philippines. Veterans who watched it shook their heads. That wasn't how it was, they said. You can't show men soiling themselves on screen. You can't film the smell of rotting flesh. You can't capture the feeling of marching when your body has nothing left. Hollywood made it look heroic. It wasn't heroic. It was survival. The Marauders changed American military doctrine forever. The Rangers claim them as ancestors. Special forces study their tactics at Fort Bragg. Long-range penetration operations became standard practice. When American forces fought in Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq, they used lessons written in blood in Burma. Military academies around the world teach the Burma campaign. Even Japanese military schools study how 3,000 Americans did what entire armies couldn't do. They examine the ambush at Shaduzup, the defense of Mpumga, the impossible capture of Myitkyina. They try to understand how dying men kept fighting. Russell Hamler was the last Marauder. He died in 2022 at 99 years old. With his death, the direct link to their story ended. But in his final interview, he said something that captured everything. We weren't special, he said. We were ordinary men asked to do something extraordinary. And we did it because that's what needed doing. They called us white monkeys playing soldier in the jungle. By the end, those same Japanese commanders were writing reports about facing demons who refused to die. History now calls us legendary. But we were just Americans doing our job in a place nobody else wanted to go.